It's the Migrating to Australia show. I'm not going to call it podcast because we'll probably do more in this little presentation that's just streaming and fun for
live, unexpurgated. How are you, Grant?
Good. I better do my corny. Migrating to Australia, the podcast with Australia's. I don't know what to call you today, David. You're looking very dapper, actually.
It's the black. It's the black is slimming, and I've had a shave the day before, so I'm not as hairy as I usually appear to be. I'm feeling good because it's Thursday and it's been a good week. Have you had a good week?
Yeah, I've had a busy week. It's a bit of a stressful time at the moment because commitments don't stop. You know that. You run an office. You've got employees.
Great team. Hi, Jess. Hope you're listening. Hi, Chloe. Hope you're listening. Francesca, you listening?
I've tried for a long time to not have people relying on me, but as you know, and hopefully some listeners know, that I try and give work to people who really need it and skill people up so that they can then no longer rely on me and maybe get some more regular type of employment. Because in what I do, it's feast or famine. And during the lockdown, it's absolutely been famine. But I can't reduce my costs much further because that means shows end. You know, that's the only way to
understood.
So yeah, it's been. I haven't really complained about it much, but that second lockdown knocked the stuffing out of me, and a lot of people who were planning to do things have just
put them on hold.
Yeah, I think there's a real sense of certainty that I'm feeling in Australia that I didn't really feel it so much even in the long lockdown that we had. I just think now because a whole bunch of government support is going to be withdrawn from business soon, and the rent holiday that all the businesses have not the rent holiday, the repaying their mortgages and business loans and all that stuff, that all comes to an end really soon. And I think people are just waiting. And
one of the things, talking about health and mental health and fiscal health, I had a message from a listener earlier this week, and he's been doing long drives around rural Victoria in the line of his work. He's become addicted to our podcast. He used those words, he's addicted. And he said, let's see what Grant's up to. He wants to know and thank you for the message, Adrian. He wants to know how your health is now, listeners. 2 years ago?
Yeah, what was it? September
2029. So nearly 2 years ago, you had a 15-kilogram tumour removed from your stomach.
I did. Well, removed from my torso, from your
torso.
And if you are a recent listener, we've already done 2 episodes on this. We talked about this. I think the heading of the episode is, I think it was Grant's Big Challenge. I think I titled it, big clickbaity title. And we talked about that just a couple of days before I went in for surgery. And just a reminder, it's been so long, I'm a bit tired of telling the story, but I went into hospital because I wasn't feeling well. I went to the surgery, to emergency on a Saturday afternoon. They kept me in overnight. The next morning, Sunday night, they let me out, but I had an appointment with the surgeon anyway, I can't remember whether it was Monday afternoon or Tuesday afternoon. I think it might have been the Tuesday, because I don't think we had many days, did we?
No.
And he told me that I needed immediate surgery, but the big kicker, I kind of thought that I was going to have surgery. I didn't realise it. I just didn't know I had this big tumour in there. And the big kicker for me was that he told me the surgery was really serious. It was really big, and that I was a less than 50% chance to survive the the surgery, and the surgery is on Friday. He told me. So that was, I think it was I'm pretty sure it was the Tuesday, and then you said come down to the office and we'll do a podcast and
But
talk
you did
about
Constitution of a Bull. You have the Constitution of a Bull. Do you remember when you came in and showed me the photo of the tumour? And there was a doctor in the shared waiting room I have, and she overheard us talking. She wanted to have a look.
Yeah, and to sort of fill in the story, one of the surgical team, it was such a big tumour, it was such a big operation that a lot of the surgeons in the hospital and in the network apparently
took an interest. Yeah.
Someone took some photos while I was going under the knife, and if anyone is interested, I've said it before, you can have a look at my Instagram. I don't have the photo on my phone or anything. It was actually sent to my old phone, which crashed and died, and I couldn't get anything off it. And I'd only posted the picture to Instagram. So if you have a look at my Instagram, which is, and it's because it was a 1 in a million chance that all this stuff would happen, you can actually see the lump and you can see a picture of me in the surgery. So,
and it's not exaggeration, Grant, to call it a basketball, is it? It's not exaggeration at all.
No, it was about the size of a soccer ball, basketball, yeah. And it's gone. It was attached to one of my kidneys, so that kidney is gone. And I've now got a scar that runs from, well, there's where my breastbone ends. And let's see if
this is why it's good. This is why it's good no one's watching.
Can I get this going?
I mean, where does it run? How long is the scar?
There you go. Can you see? The
No.
top of the scar is just top of the scar is there,
and it runs right down.
Runs down to just above the whizzer.
So about 8 inches, 9 inches. It's a massive scar. I mean, they literally cut you open, didn't they?
And it's more like 40 inches.
I'm never good at numbers or math. That's why I became a lawyer.
It goes from just below where my nipples are down to just above
here Apple drops cuts the podcast.
So here we are migrating to Australia.
The thing. Tell people how much better your breathing is, how less reliant you are on nebulizers, and how your health's improved as a consequence. I mean,
well, it's interesting just thinking about it today. In my bag that I take with me every time I go out, with my spare mask and my sunscreen and all that stuff, and my puffers, I've got a preventer and I've got a reliever. I think we're getting on to 2 weeks since I've even had to use one, which is
fantastic.
Great.
Fantastic.
So my health now is pretty good, and for Adrian's purposes, I was on monthly monitoring, like checkups, and then it went to 3 monthly for the scans. Now what I do is just a blood test, and that's monthly, and I converse with my GP every 3 months, and I'm actually have a blood test that I'll be doing on in 2 days, and then next week, in the middle of next week, I'll have a chat to my GP about those results. And if those results are the same as they have been for pretty much, I think it took about 2 months from the surgery. After 2 months, it was pretty normal. And if that stays normal, that's fine. I don't then have another scan until May.
When are you considered to be in remission? When are you considered in remission?
They say 5 years. 5 years clear is you can basically stop thinking about it. At 3 years, you're pretty much certain, but things do happen after the 5 years. So, but I'm pretty.
Is that post surgery? 5 years post surgery, or?
Yeah. And the surgery got everything. There was a tiny bit left on it on one of the glands. They didn't remove one of the adrenal glands, I think. But yeah, look, I feel great. I'm in the best condition I've been in for a long time, physically for sure. Apart from stacking all those lockdown kilos, but you know, David, since we first met, I'd made all sorts of changes in my life, both forced and chosen, to live a less stressful life. I decided to live a small life because a small life is less stressful. And look, it's working for me. So, Adrian, things are good. Sorry for everyone else that this is such an indulgent moment, but I don't give it a thought anymore. And look, as you know, David, I wasn't that. I'm pretty matter of fact. I just thought, well, I can't control what happens. If I wake up, well, that's great. Did wake up. I was happy about that, and you just get on with it. You just get on with it.
You were out very quickly too.
Yeah, I think I was only in for 4 days or something.
Yeah.
I remember. I would have liked another couple of days, to be honest, because it was pretty. It was pretty short, and I had I had the staples. I had the big staples. I think I had 112 staples. I think it was on the.
Christ,
on
that's extraordinary. So, it's extraordinary.
Yeah, it's a big. It's a zipper all the way. People when they have open heart surgery, they have their scar up here. Well, I've got mine below that, all the way down to the good bits.
You can tell people it was a knife fight in Mindanao, and you survived to tell the tale.
Yeah, well, I've actually got a new People Army story for Mindanao, but that's for another time.
So today we're talking about Alcatraz. That's Australia. It's about people. We thought we'd do a podcast on something for people who want to leave Australia, to get out of Australia, because it has seemed like a prison during this lockdown, but we can actually leave. As Australian permanent residents and Australian citizens, we can leave. So Grant and I are going to go through what needs to be considered if you wish to leave. Before we say that, you should have a really good reason to leave, because while we have all suffered in various forms during lockdown, we are safe in Australia, thank goodness, not like a lot of other countries.
Yeah, and just for information for anyone in other countries, I think every state now has removed the hot list or red zone listings against any other cities. We're having COVID turning up in hospital quarantine. Everybody who comes in to the country has to quarantine for 14 days. Rich people like one of the Jonas brothers. I like what they called him. The Jonas brother is producing Nick Jonas's show.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing some show. Now he's the producer. I checked the show. There's a pile of producers. So he's like when you look at a show and there's a million executive
producers. Yeah.
One of the people that actually doesn't do anything.
That often means they've just weighed in with some money very often.
Yeah. Well, he got an exemption from hotel quarantine. He got to go to some luxury.
I'll probably upset people, but who are the Jonas Brothers? Are they musicians?
They were Disney things, and then 3 of them were in the Jonas Brothers, and they did, cover versions of songs that were good before they wrecked them. Sorry, but,
I mean, we can understand why certain actors and certain directors have been given an exemption from quarantine. The justification is the financial benefit they bring, creating movies, employment.
I understand they're being allowed in. I don't understand for a second why they're being allowed to go and hang out in northern New South Wales. Just because they're staying at some villa, I don't trust them to.
No, that's a valid point about trust. But they're supposed to be
any of them not to go down the street to get a loaf of bread or a pint of milk, or to have someone else bring it to them, and then they put the other people in danger. I think everyone should be if they want to do it in their mansion, there should be a couple of coppers standing there.
Don't they have COVID plans where they have people with them?
Private security that they
private security. I mean, let's look at it in an optimistic sense and hope it's something that does work, because we certainly need the business and the activity coming back to Australia. And film production is very expensive, creates a lot of jobs for a lot of people locally. So I don't know if we'll see Nicole Kidman's film as she started it.
I don't know, but
or Tom Hanks's one as he started. I don't know.
I wouldn't be so grumpy about it if the government had spent money on supporting creatives who didn't fly in from overseas, because they didn't do that.
No, they certainly didn't do that. That they did not do.
But that's enough. I'm getting grumpy again. Look, the thing about leaving, David, you can go through all the specific reasons, but the simple fact is, unless you are very, very wealthy, you won't get a flight anyway. So that's
the other big issue. Correct. It's all well and good to be permitted to leave, but if that flight is cancelled and recancelled, you won't get out anyway.
I mean, the head of Qantas has been out doing the publicity rounds today saying
October.
We expect to be scheduling international flights again in October. Now, if Qantas aren't flying out of Australia, all you've got is Emirates are flying in. I saw a Garuda plane overhead early this morning.
You're kidding.
That was leaving, but it didn't have all of the insignia on it. It just had the tail done. I'm suspecting that was freight.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fair call. That makes sense. I mean, I'll tell you one thing, your eyes certainly haven't suffered. How could you make out the insignia?
Well, I can. They take off from the airport and they do what would it be? A right turn. They bank to the right and they fly straight over.
Only a couple of thousand feet above you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I can't see who it is, I look up the Skyscanner app and get the details.
There you go. Get the details.
But lately they've been very low, and because there's so few of them, there's no congestion in the sky. They are all coming in low. You can see who they are. You can hear them. But we used to have a plane every sort of 8 minutes overhead.
What is it now?
Domestic.
Just a couple a day. Just a couple a day.
Most of the domestics aren't even flying overhead anymore. They're using the other runway, and we don't even see them, and I don't hear them. It used to be a problem, podcasting. It used to be a problem creating, I'd be creating intros and stings and whatnot, and the plane would be going overhead and I'd have to wait. You got to wait maybe 5 minutes from the time you can hear it before it goes away. But no. So
people want to go. People want to leave to see loved ones. People want to leave to see family members. People want to leave to pursue job opportunities. People want to leave because they've had enough of Australia. There's been a lot of local press and national press about people moving to the bush, moving north to Queensland. But the truth is, if you want to leave Australia, you can leave. You've got to have great reasons, and you've also got to be with ticket and flight that's not cancelled. Permanent residents and citizens, they have to apply online, and they've got to show good reasons why. A good reason might be your loved one you've been separated from a year. You want to go and see that person, be with that person. You've got to go for more than 3 months. You've got to have compelling, compassionate circumstances, compelling, compassionate reasons. I'll give you an example. You meet the love of your life in Italy, France, Thailand. You spend time with them. You spend a lot of time with them. You come home. You want to bring them out. There's lockdown. And there's lockdown from March of 2020 to now. What are we? February of 2021. It's nearly been a year. Can you believe it, Grant? Now, what happens? Email, phone call, missing each other, people pining for each other. So what's happening? A lot of loved ones are leaving Australia because it's easier to leave than bring their loved ones into Australia. But people who are here are getting a good go, and we can talk about that maybe on Saturday. That is the people who are on visas that require you to leave to be granted the visa don't have to do that anymore, or for a temporary period for a temporary period from the 27th. We can talk about it on Saturday. People who have a 103 visa, a 143 visa, a 173 visa, normally if you're in Australia when they're ready to be granted, you have to leave. Because of COVID, you don't have to leave. And a few other visas are going to get into the pipeline down in March where they also don't have to leave. And we'll talk about that on Saturday because that's the day it opens. But we're talking tonight about leaving the country. And obviously, you've got to get a flight. You've got to get a visa. You have to get a visa for the other country. Reasons to leave: a loved one, pursuing a relationship overseas, pursuing job opportunities overseas, going for more than 3 months. More than 3 months is the key. You've got to be very careful about that. If you're going to go to the United States for whatever reason, for example, you get a 3-month visa to be in the United States, but Australia, you have to leave and be more than 3 months outside Australia. So there are little tactics involved so you don't get pushed back when you arrive in the United States. Imagine flying to the United States because you're showing Australia that you've got more than 90 days to be outside the country, and they stop you at the border and say, you're not genuine, you want to spend more than 90 days, you don't have a visa to spend more than 90 days, and they send you back. That can happen. That's a danger. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think there's a more obvious danger, David.
COVID. Tell me.
That's the most obvious danger, that there are airlines and states in America are behaving the same way that the states have here. And then there's the national governments. There are some airlines where they're saying you need to be vaccinated, or you need to have had COVID. You need to have COVID antibodies, or we won't let you on. There are some who are saying you need to have a positive clear COVID test within 72 hours. Now, there's some places
that's happening. That's happening coming into Australia too.
Yeah,
that's happening coming into Australia.
We don't know what it's going to be, but with the vaccines, we're miles behind.
We're miles behind, but we know a number of doctors who are going to fight for the national health. What do they call the United Kingdom? The National Health System, NHS. A couple of Australian doctors I know are leaving, and they're going to fight the COVID battle in the NHS because they're dual citizens. And the Australian government has no issue with them leaving. They can leave.
No, that's okay. What I'm saying is, if it's you or me, David,
we've got to have really good reasons.
My doctor has told me that the earliest I'm going to get a COVID injection is July.
It's July.
Now, the Australian vaccination program in a week has fallen 3 weeks behind. So, I mean, the chances are that instead of July, mine will be in September, perhaps, if everything goes well. We don't know.
I suppose the other question is, Grant, though, even with the vaccine, do you want to go? I don't want to travel at the moment, not for a while.
That's the point I'm making, David, that even if people want to leave and they think they've got a really, really good reason, you don't know what's waiting for you at the other end.
You've got to have a visa. You've got to have a visa. That's right. And you've got to satisfy that criteria for the country you're going to.
But even if you've got a visa, you might find that where you go gets blacklisted.
Absolutely.
So we just do not know. That's the point I'm making.
And that's the danger in taking any form of travel, be it for the NHS or going for your own business or going for your employer. You've got to have very, very strong reasons. One of the reasons that won't fly is getting medical treatment outside Australia. We have world-class medical facilities here, so that's one that won't get you out. I can't think of any sort of illness or any issue that would not be able to be dealt with in an Australian hospital.
But even more basic, David, imagine going to a country where they've got vaccinations happening, but they've got a shortage. They don't have enough. You're not going to get it before a citizen is going to get it. You're not going to get it before their aged care residents and their emergency workers and their police and whatnot. So it just seems like unless you absolutely have to go, I think my personal view is you're crazy.
You sit and wait. Oh, absolutely.
And then there's 40,000 citizens and permanent residents trying to get back. We've got limits on how many people can enter the country to come back. So even if you manage to get a flight, I mean, look at all the stories that people are ready to get on their flight, and then they get bumped, and
13, 14, 15 times.
And then they're in contravention of their visa from where they are. It's just too risky.
It is too risky, but if you do have to travel, the threshold is high. I've done it for a few people who've basically said, I miss the love of my life. My love of my life can't come here, so I'm going there. And it necessitates a lot of logistics at the offshore end, and you've got to get permission to leave. You've got to show why you're going. And, I mean, if you're pursuing a loved one, for example, because the loved one can't come here, you'd have to show you're renting your house out, you've resigned from your job, you've lined up work in the new country, you're going to be hosted, housed by your loved one who owns or rents their property. It's a major logistical exercise, a major evidence-gathering exercise, and you've got to coordinate both ends to make sure it's a smooth departure from Australia, because if you don't, you won't. Funerals are very hard because funerals come, they take place, and then it's done. Now, you've got to have a reason to leave for more than 3 months. So I would say that anybody trying to leave to attend a funeral won't get an exemption. But if someone's leaving because their father has died and their mother is alone and mother needs care, that might be a way to do it. Might be a way. I got one recently for a client, and he went back to his home country because his mother and father did have COVID, and he was instrumental in helping mum around the house and look after everything, and he was okay, thank goodness. Mum came back, but Dad's slowly recuperating. Dad's left hospital. So when family members are suffering, you leave for more than three months and show what you're going to be doing. You get letters from doctors to show your parent has passed, your parent is ill, your parent's incapacitated and needs you. You've got to gather a lot of evidence. People are trying on the same evidence or little variants on the evidence and wondering why they don't succeed. It's all about the evidence. You get letters from your hospital doctor, letters from your hospital specialist. You explain that to your employer that you can work from offshore. Like what he did, he was creative. He's an engineer, a very, very brilliant man. His country time zone is 3 hours behind ours. So he worked Australian hours online. And that was another thing we used to show that he's still got his employment, he's got a sympathetic employer. So you've got to organise everything from point of departure and from the point of arrival. And people can't just say, I want to go to a funeral, or Dad's died and I've got to look after Mum. You've got to show how Mum needs to be looked after, why she needs to be looked after, how there are no brothers and sisters in the neighbourhood who can look after her, and you in Australia are the only person, and it will be at least 4 or 5 months before you can set up a hierarchy of care for her and return safely yourself.
And then returning is not guaranteed. And
you've got to do your 2 weeks of quarantine at $3,000.
And depending on where you're going, some countries you have to quarantine for 14 days on the way in. So you could be looking at $3,000 quarantine fee on the way out, $3,000 on the way in, and depending on, people are saying they're still paying $2,000, $3,000 for airfares that used to be $600, $700, $800. So you could be looking at taking a $10,000 gamble. Still not being able to actually get a flight to come back. And then you're looking at contravention of your visa.
What else they've done, Grant? Do you know what else they've done? They make you swear a Commonwealth statutory declaration. And if you're not truthful on your reasons for leaving, attending to business, family affairs, financial affairs in the home territory, and when you're coming back, if you don't disclose everything and support the statutory declaration with evidence, you've got a lot of questions to answer and possible charges to face if you come home early.
It's a big deal, which is why I'm saying I can understand why people want to go, but the thing that I always bear in mind is that you don't know what is happening on the other end. There are so many Australians stuck in India, stuck in Europe, in the UK. There are so many stuck in South America. They just can't get back. Now, they're homeless. A lot of these people
Effectively,
are
they are.
a lot of them are not only just effectively homeless, they are homeless. I heard an interview with a couple the other day who'd been working in the UK health system. Their lease is finished. They're out of money. Their contract finished. If someone doesn't let them sleep on the couch and feed them, they're homeless. And they're in contravention of their visa status because their jobs are over, and they were booked to come home, but they were bumped. The flights were so. Look, I don't know, and here we are, David. First world privilege,
100%, Grant. We're safe. This. We're locked down, and that's why we'll also do a podcast on coming to Australia, what you need to come to Australia. But there are exemptions. Government officials can travel willy-nilly. There's no issue for government officials to leave Australia. They can hop on a government plane and fly out. If you're working in offshore facilities in Australian waters, you can also leave. Kiwis, they can leave tomorrow. We love Kiwis, so we don't want any Kiwis. We want Kiwis to stay safe and stay in Australia because they're great people.
We've got the bubble arrangement with the Kiwis, but that's been cancelled.
They can leave any time, though. They can leave, and people who are not normally resident in Australia, internationals, can go if they have a flight.
They can get a flight.
They can get a flight tomorrow. They can leave.
And that's the big proviso, though. If they can get a flight that used to be a couple of $100 might now be several thousands of dollars, and
absolutely,
you just might not get out.
So people who are here, who are temporary residents, if all the ducks are lined up, they can leave tomorrow. All the ducks have to be lined up. People who are listening who are permanent resident or citizens, it's not easy at all. It's not easy at all.
And
in terms of when to do it, the other thing is this: if you say you're going to the United Kingdom, well, you've got to get the UK visa, and you've got to balance that with leaving and getting the exemption. So your timing needs to be appropriate, and you don't want to do one thing before the other. I mean, it's no good if you get the exemption and you haven't got a visa for the foreign country. So it requires a lot of planning and a lot of thought. And a lot of people are getting rejected because they haven't given it thought, or they don't give evidence. One of the biggest criticisms people who assess the application state is there's insufficient evidence.
Yeah, I did hear some people complaining about this the other day, Dave, and they were saying so much red tape. But then I was thinking, you're gonna get out, and then you're probably going to be one of the people who wants to come back, and you're stuck in this backlog of 40,000 people trying to get back, and I think we're only letting 3,000 a week in, aren't we?
Not too sure on the numbers, but they are a movable feast. They go up, they go down, and so by the time this podcast's out and about, we it could be totally different. But the story is, it will remain difficult to leave Australia until we're all vaccinated and the borders are down. It'll be very difficult if we're Australian. No holidays in Bali for people. No holidays in what is it? Koh Samui. Yeah, no summer holidays for anybody in Thailand or Bali.
I mean, I take my pointers from the people whose livelihood and their businesses rely on the travel, and I think if the head of Qantas is saying international flights in October, I reckon he's on the money. I don't think. I don't think he would have come out in public if he didn't know that. So that to me says he knows something that the government isn't telling us, because the government was telling us that 40 million of us are going to have had our jabs. We're all going to be fine in September. Well,
Well,
October's not September.
I tell you what, you and I could go for street eating in Kuala Lumpur for my 52nd birthday if we're flying out in October, mate. What do you reckon?
I think,
Nasi lemak, 3 meals a day, beautiful. Curry puffs,
but you know what's going to
ikan bilis. What?
You know what's going to happen as soon as travel is okay and the borders are down. All of us who have been budgeting for those $500 flights are going to go, what? They're $2,500. What? That's what's going to happen. There's going to be this rush, and the airlines aren't going to put full capacity on. It'll take them months to gear up properly.
That's right, correct.
So I still don't think I don't think I'll be traveling until this time next year, maybe sort of April, May next year. I don't think it's going to be feasible for me.
What I want to touch on before we move on is the ubiquitous doctor's certificate. Now, don't get your doctor to write, Grant needs to see his granny in Tucson, Arizona, because she's sick. I mean, that's your standard, ridiculous, useless doctor certificate. Actually, get a report. Get a report not just from your end, but from grandma's end, because doctor certificates aren't worth the paper they're printed on most of the time.
David, remember the glorious days when you'd front up for work after you've had a sickie because you had a hangover or you'd been out seeing the Cramps or Madonna, at a concert the night before or something, and then you've rocked up with your medical certificate for having a day off, and it said he Grant was suffering from a medical condition, and your employer used to go, oh, okay. Now,
specificity is the key. Specificity is the key. Saying that Grant has to see his sick grandma and look after her in Tucson, Arizona is not enough. It has to be pages and pages and pages.
They're going to want to see medical reports from the other end.
They want to see the history. They want to see that she's actually your auntie. They want to see that you've got the time off work. They want to see that she's actually got a room in her house where you can sleep, look after it. They want to see why she doesn't have other nieces and nephews stateside. It's a major production.
Private care, all that.
Or private care, absolutely. They make it purposely difficult.
The other thing, David, I just want to throw in, again, it's anecdotal because I've been listening to, I listen to the BBC overnight and whatnot. They've been talking to a lot of people who are trapped or can't do what they want to do. The other countries don't want casual visitors turning up. They got enough to look after themselves. So,
correct. If there are any Australian permanent residents, Australian citizens listening, and they want to know more, reach out because we're here to help. And it is not Alcatraz, though it sometimes feels like it's Alcatraz. Now, only one person ever escaped from Alcatraz. That was Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, and look, again, it's white people privilege, mate. One of my friends I was speaking to in the Philippines today, the whole family's had COVID, right? They've recovered. They got hit by the typhoon 3 months ago.
And there's a second one as well.
Just started to rebuild their lives. Oh, and father has had a really serious illness, and the medical costs, because they don't have the healthcare system we do, costs crippled the family. And see a message on the phone with a photo, and it's flooding. It's just been, the typhoon went through a couple of days ago. They didn't suffer any damage, but now upstream they had heaps of rain. It's come down, and now they're just praying that tonight they don't get flooded out and have to find somewhere else to go. So I always feel bad when we're whinging about how tough we've got it here, because the pandemic and all the other stuff that goes on periodically everywhere in the world, it's really tough. And
I mean, it is tough.
We're just on hold.
We are on hold.
That's what's happening here.
People leave Australia in this time of pandemic for those reasons we've articulated: funeral, sick relative, employment, automatic exemption because they're government official or they work inbound, outbound freight. If you do have a funeral, make sure you get all the material. Make sure you show, like, if it's your dad, your mum, you must apply and pressure them to grant it. There is that 3 month, more than 3 months away, but they do have a directive. That they should approve funerals. What they'll be is nasty with funerals. And if it's your dad, they'll probably let you go. But if it's your father-in-law, they probably won't.
What?
Each case is assessed on its own merits. The
3 month, the 90 days situation.
Yeah, you've got to show that.
Is that because of the visa at the other end, or is the Australian government saying, "Sure, we're happy to let you leave"?
You gotta have a good reason.
3 months.
Yeah.
So
what happens? It's both. It's both because.
So can you fly to the South Pacific for a funeral that is due to happen next Thursday, and then come back 2 weeks after that, or a week after that? Or do you have to
go for a funeral? Yes, they should. Their policy is to allow you to do that. But if you can't gain entry to the country where the funeral's been held,
that's what I wanted to clarify. So that if it's a country where you can go have the funeral, they understand that country understands the situation, and then they let you come back. You're not going to be stopped from coming back. Where the issue is if you go to a country where the only way they're going to let you in is on a visa. Well, no, I'm lost. I can't.
What happens is this.
The US is going to say you can't stay more than 90 days.
What happened recently? Some clients flew stateside for their visa to be granted. If they'd had a bit more time and the government had been a little bit slower in processing their visa, they could have availed themselves of the provisions that start next week. But this was some months ago, so they couldn't. They flew to the States and they flew a few days later back when the visa was granted because they have to be offshore. It was far more preferable for them to go to the United States than their home country, because if they'd gone to their home country, God knows what would have happened.
Okay, but they weren't permanent residents.
They were grandparents, so it was a parent visa, a contributory parent visa, and they were in Australia looking after their grandchildren, having a great time. They got stuck here because of COVID, and the provisions that are coming into place on the 27th would have been perfect for them, but their time for visa processing was just before Christmas, so they couldn't have stayed here for the next 2 months and brought their time up to now because the government wouldn't allow it. It was time for them to pay the money for the visa, the second visa application charge, go offshore, come back, have the visa granted.
Now, is there a different situation or a different attitude for the processing and the granting of the exit visa, the exemption for
Australians and PR and citizens? Is very different.
Okay, so you and I are citizens?
Yeah, so we have to show how long we're going away for, our purpose for departure, that we have a visa at the other end, that we've budgeted for a return, we have our flights booked for return, and we have leave from our employer or letter from our employer that we need to work at the Missouri plant of our business. It's evidence from both sides of the pond.
Okay, so if you are not going for work, like you had just...
If you're not going for work, if you're going to pursue the love of your life, you've got to show that you've wound down everything at home. You've resigned from your job. Oh, Grant, lovely service. Here's your watch, mate. Thanks for being with us the last 10 years. Pity we can't get Sarah here to Australia. We understand you're going to be with Sarah in Angola. And so what happens is you show you're renting your place, you're selling your place, you've resigned from your job, you've sold your car, that you've got a visa for Angola, that Sarah is putting you up in her grandparents' house because that's where you want to live, that she's organised for you to take an English language tuition teaching job in Luanda. Isn't that the capital of Angola, Luanda?
Isn't Luanda Zambia?
Is it Zambia? No,
I don't know.
Angola. Anyway, do you see the patterns? Love, professional, personal
Yeah,
reasons.
yeah.
You have to wind down what you're doing here, or have permission to leave what you're doing here, and a visa and evidence to show you're establishing a life, or establishing a short-term visit of 3 months or more with the engineer. Proof that Dad was in hospital. Proof that Mum and his sister were sick, quarantining. Proof that he could work in the time zone for the Australian business he works for. Proof that he'd be coming back after X number of months. And then you get it. The only danger with a funeral is, they tend to happen very quickly. And to get an exemption out, to get a visa for the country you're flying to, or if you've got a passport, you're a citizen of that country, getting a flight there, these things take time. And, the turnaround, for want of a better term, from the passing of somebody to their internment is usually a week, isn't it? It's not much longer.
Now, well, I want to ask a couple of specific questions. With the bubble arrangement that has stood with New Zealand and will probably be reinstated again soon, does an Australian citizen or permanent resident need an exemption to fly to New Zealand?
Oh, I don't know about New Zealand because it's New Zealand law. Not sure. Not
Okay.
sure.
Now,
I don't know anything about New Zealand, but I do want to see Queenstown. That's the only thing I know about New Zealand, Queenstown.
Now, if an Australian citizen or permanent resident wants to go to, let's say, the EU for a funeral, and the funeral is in, let's push it out to 5 days.
Very tight. Very tight.
And the government is dragging its feet. Are they stopping at the gate anybody who does not have an exemption, or does the fact that you don't have an exemption mean that when you get to the other end, you're going to have trouble with their immigration system because you haven't got a visa to enter for anything other than maybe a tourist purpose, and that are the Australian government, if you can get a flight back, the Australian government going to stop you at the immigration gates in Sydney or Melbourne or Brisbane on your way back?
If you haven't got a travel exemption, you can't leave.
Okay, so they
won't let you out. They will not let you out. So you've got to have a travel exemption. You've got to have a visa for the other country. They want to see that you've got a lawful right to enter that country. But if you do not have, as a permanent resident or citizen,
as you're leaving, you're showing your passport at the gate, and then they're going to want your either e ticket, your exemption on your phone, or a letter, a stamped official letter to show somewhere before you can get into the departure lounge. Is that?
You won't if you don't have proof. I mean, this could all be moot in 4 months, or what is it, October? So 6-8 months. But the story is, if you try and leave now without an exemption, they'll stop you. You're not allowed to leave.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to work out what the process is. Who stops you? Is it
Australian Border Force?
But before you get to Border Force, you go to the ticket desk. Are they going to want to see your exemption before they even let you go to the?
You apply for both at the same time, and when you get your ticket, you show your ticket, or if you get your ticket, you apply for exemption. You apply for them at the same time or within a day or so of each other. An exemption shouldn't take too long to process. When we do them, they take 2-3 days tops, and we do it when they've got a ticket as well. It's not going to happen if you haven't got the exemption.
Okay. Now, you've given the example of a couple of clients you've helped who have got the exemption. Have you had any that have been knocked back for reasons that you think are a bit unfair?
When I explain who can go and who will struggle to go, people are pretty good. We haven't had any knockback yet. We've had people decide not to go when we've laid out what you need to leave and how you're at risk coming back. And basically, we make sure any traveller we assist who's a permanent resident or a citizen who wishes to leave is fully armed.
Have you had any examples, David, of people who have left earlier on in the pandemic and then are having issues at the other end with visas?
No, because we've always made sure, or we always tell people who do it themselves, that they must have the lawful right to enter the country they're in. Because it's not Australian migration law, we can't take it any further than that.
Okay. Well, the reason I ask you that is that you make sure that your clients are very well prepared so that the level of risk is just
minimised. Totally.
zero.
I mean, the good thing is this: 2 or 3 days you have the exemption, or you don't have it. And I just worry. The tough one is for funerals, because under their policy, under their directive, they should be allowing people. But then when you've got is the flight there, the flight back, the lawful right to enter, and a lot of people miss out.
And the thing that
you've got to be family members too. Remember, it's relative, immediate family.
Yeah, immediate family.
It's cousins. Forget about cousins.
But the thing that is really sad when it comes to funerals and perhaps, are they letting people go where death is imminent?
If people are very sick, they're in palliative care, or they're, on death's door in some shape or form, yeah, they are allowed to go, but you've got to have the doctor's report. You've got to have not only the diagnosis but the prognosis.
Yeah.
You've got to hit Australian Border Force with everything you've got.
Yeah.
And then the other issue is, if you're not going to an English speaking territory, or the doctors should be able to prepare documentation in English, but you've got to get it translated if they don't.
Well, that was the point I was just about to make, is that, again, it's the unfairness of the first world versus the second world and the third world. These exemptions and the ability to come back and just the ability to get out and back in a hurry really depends on the port you're going to.
100%, and the purpose of your visit and the country you're going to as well. That's right.
But you're going to be treated very differently, I think, if you're flying to Egypt than if you're flying to Britain.
100%, without a doubt. At both ends.
Yeah, which is, and it's understandable, but it's not fair. Again, it's first world privilege. I'm
100%. 100%.
David.
Now, I mean, bottom line, if it's not essential, stay home, stay safe. Easy for us to say, once again, safe in our homes, COVID-free. Sometimes people don't have that choice, but the Australian government has, through Border Force, Department of Home Affairs, high hurdles to clear. One of the things we often pipe about, and it's important to pipe on about, is greener pastures, and shifting from Australian permanent residents and Australian citizens wanting to leave. We just thought we'd touch briefly on people who move from one state or the other in the hope that the state migration program they're moving to might be better than the one they're in. And South Australia this week took a number of occupations off its state skilled migration list for the 489 and the 491 and the 190 visa. And they're subject, this is a change on the list 3 weeks after it was introduced. Or 2 weeks. It came out on the 8th, and due to high interest in particular occupations, they've been removed pending whether or not they'll be sustained on the lists. So it goes back to what you and I have always said for years. The grass isn't necessarily greener in another state or another territory. When you make a move to Australia and you choose a state to reside in or a territory to reside in, if a state or a territory around the country offers a more attractive process, a migration system that may seem easier to use to get permanent residency, think very carefully about it. Think very carefully. You'd never, migration happens and it's governed by, there's federal law and there's state law, and they interplay. Federal law gives us the 189 visa and that's the holy grail for skilled migration, independent migration. They're increasingly tough to get these days, increasingly tough. And we've touched in episodes on state migration, territory migration, the 491 visa, which is a provisional visa, and the 190, which is state-sponsored or territory-sponsored permanent residency. State and territory-sponsored permanent residency is a very fast and effective way to go if you're a medical professional, a high-skilled IT engineer or social worker in the rebuilding, reconstructing of Australia post-COVID. Getting 189 visas these days is very, very tough. If you leave and move to a territory that's not yours, you've got to start again effectively. But there are provisions, Grant. I don't know how many people would have moved to South Australia on the news of February 8, but you've got to work in South Australia. You've got to have proven that you're linked to South Australia, to use South Australia as an example, because February 8, the list was released. February 24, some key revisions were made, and whether those occupations come back remains to be seen.
Now, I'm going to stop you there, David, because you mentioned earlier that we're going to talk about South Australia and probably Tasmania on the weekend.
Absolutely. We'll go into greater detail.
So in the next week or so, we will have a more detailed look at the skilled migration, the state-nominated programs, and give you the best information as we can. We've already had a look at them, and we didn't go on with those episodes because there was a lot of
stuff up in the air. We probably approached it a bit too early, which is
but it's good because we were looking at those lists, and now those lists are different. So
they are different. And also, I mean, whether they come back in a different form or shorter, longer remains to be seen. Most likely shorter. So it's buyer beware with state migration. Federal law generally changes every July 1 with new migration year. The lists change generally. This is talking purely skilled migration.
Yeah.
The states are not governed by that. They don't have a new migration year. Yes, they are involved with their allocation for 491s and 190s. They're involved with the migration year, but they chop and change, as is evidenced with South Australia, who got their final list out on February 8. It's revised and subject to redo 2 weeks after it was introduced.
Yeah. Well, let's not take up any more time on that.
On the weekend.
We will do a dedicated podcast for that. Now, in a moment, going to outro the podcast, but we're going to keep the stream going because we're going to have some fun.
This is your fun, not mine.
Because we need some fun. I think you'll have a bit of fun here, and I was kind of hoping we might get some people asking us some questions, but
you got to remember, Grant. No one listens to us live, but everyone watches us on repeat.
Well, there are some people watching us live now, David, which is why I'm about to do this. So this is so that I know where to do the edit point in the actual podcast. David, Migrating to Australia podcast. We've done it again. Where can people contact you, David?
The fastest way to reach out, is direct message on Twitter. And my Twitter handle is @DavidBongiorno, all one word, DAVID, Bongiorno, BONGIORNO. That is by far the fastest way. For example, if you're listening to this live and sent me a direct message on Twitter now, I'd probably respond straight after the podcast.
Which is going to be a little while yet.
Haven't we put people through enough?
Right. And what I'm going to say, David, is a big statement. We're just about to unveil the Migrating to Australia podcast.com 2.0. It's just about back with a bit of a redesign. So by the time this podcast goes out, I think we'll have some new content on there. So the best way to get hold of me, if you would like to talk about anything to do with Migrating to Australia podcast, is through the comments on migratingtoaustraliapodcast.com. Of course, you can find me on Twitter as well, but that's not the preferred way.
Now, Grant, did I tell you earlier in the week
hold on.
I've got some good news. I'll forget.
Oh, is this Migrating to Australia podcast information?
Yeah, I'll forget because,
Right.
and I want our listeners to help. I was just having a little vanity surf to see how we go in various places. And we poll, and I can't find the poll anymore, but we poll as the number 3 migration podcast in the country. Now, what I'm terrified about finding out is how that was ascertained and how it was determined, and also maybe the source is not as wonderful a source as we want. But this was a poll where various podcasts done by people such as us were ranked according to Google, Apple, and anyone can help us find that again and let us know whether it's a reputable source. Grant, I'll point you in the direction of it. I wonder if we're 3rd out of 10 on the equivalent of a gold sterling standard or a
just forgive us, listeners, while we scratch our own backs. But David, you know that there are stats, damn lies, and statistics.
Well, that's why I haven't named.
When I talk to you about numbers,
I glaze over.
Our downloads audited by the IAB standard, which I think it's only 2 companies who host podcasts get audited. Now, if I can switch the unaudited stats on, and when I switch to the unaudited stats, we're about 2.5 times more popular. Now, I'd just like to say, David, bearing what I've just said in mind, that we look at real numbers, 20,000 downloads can't be wrong. That's
not bad. That's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad. We're very niche, and it's not bad.
We've only done 51 podcasts in coming up to 3 years. So I would be surprised that we're number 3. I think we would be number 1 or 2. I think the other people who are claiming more have probably got
unaudited stats,
rubbish downloads, because someone starting the player for 2 seconds, that's nothing. That's rubbish. So anyway, David, that has been Migrating to Australia podcast. We are about to go into our little fun session where I want to talk about slang, Aussie slang, and it's just sprang to mind the other day because someone asked me what a lot of these words are. Now, we've often talked about a great phrase or term that people use in Australia, a drongo. Now, David, let's slip back into it. Let's reminisce. The information contained in this podcast is general in nature and should not be taken as specific legal advice. If you do take this information as specific legal advice, what are you?
You're a drongo or a galah, Grant.
That's right. Now, drongos and galahs are birds here in Australia. The drongo is also found in parts of Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. But the reason they say a drongo is that drongos clown around. They play around, they flip around on their perches. Often they eat tropical fruit that may be fermented, so they might be drunk. Galahs will do cartwheels round and round on branches and whatnot. Bye-bye. So, yeah.
Ciao, guys. Ciao.